54. That's how many European bison remained on the entire planet in 1927, not in the wild, but scattered across a handful of zoo enclosures, the last free-ranging animal already shot dead in the Caucasus Mountains. Today, herds move through the southern Carpathians in numbers approaching 200, and across the continent, that number climbs into the thousands. That shouldn't have been possible. A species doesn't usually come back from 54 captive individuals with no wild population left to reinforce it. Every single bison alive today, all several thousand of them, descends from that same tiny, fragile pool. Here's the part that surprises people first. Keeping that gene pool alive wasn't a matter of luck. It took decades of meticulous record-keeping, breeders and zoologists tracking bloodlines across borders that were, at various points, closed by war. One mismatched pairing, one overlooked cousin, and the species could have quietly collapsed from the inside, even while the animals themselves looked perfectly healthy in their enclosures. That effort bought enough genetic diversity to eventually try something bolder, releasing the descendants of those 54 animals back into real wilderness. Not a handful for show, but working herds meant to reshape land that had gone without them for generations. And reshape it they did. Within a few years of one release, researchers monitoring the site found the forest floor itself had changed. Vegetation opened up. Thickets that had choked out other life for 2 centuries suddenly broken apart. Nobody had engineered that. The bison did it just by living there. But the forest wasn't the only thing that changed. What happened next reached birds, insects, even the local economy in ways almost no one on the original recovery team had predicted. To understand how a species goes from 54 zoo animals to reshaping an entire mountain range, you have to go back to the moment humanity almost let it disappear for good. For 80 years, the entire future of this species lived inside filing cabinets. After 1927, every surviving bison existed behind fences, scattered across zoos and private estates in different countries, some of them on opposite sides of borders that would soon close for war. There was no wild population left to fall back on. Get the breeding wrong, and there was no second chance. So a small group of European zoologists did something almost unglamorous. They built a pedigree book. Every birth, every bloodline, every risky pairing tracked by hand, decade after decade, through economic collapse and a world war that scattered records and people alike. It wasn't dramatic work. It was slow, careful bookkeeping, and it was the only thing standing between the species and permanent loss. By 1954, that bookkeeping had done its job. Genetic diversity had stabilized enough to attempt something no one had tried in decades, releasing bison back into Poland's Białowieża forest, into trees their ancestors hadn't walked among in over a century. But keeping an animal alive behind fences is a holding action. The true test arrived when these captive lines were forced to confront a landscape that had forgotten them. Jump forward to 2014. Białowieża had proven bison could survive in the wild again. But survival in one forest wasn't the same as recovery across a continent. So rewilding Europe and WWF Romania set their sights on the southern Carpathians, and specifically on the Tarku Mountains, a landscape that hadn't held a wild bison in centuries. 17 animals. That was the founding number, loaded onto transports and driven deep into terrain most conservation projects would have avoided outright. Here's what most people get wrong about how this site was picked. It wasn't chosen because it was remote and empty. The mountain municipalities of Armenis, Tarragova, and Cornareva didn't just tolerate the project, they partnered in it, offering ancestral communal lands for the herd to roam. Rewilding, in this case, wasn't imposed on a landscape. It was invited. That partnership turned a single release into the foundation of something far larger, a corridor of cooperating communities stretching across the southern Carpathian arc. When the gates opened, scientists prepared for a slow, delicate adaptation phase. The bison, however, immediately went to work. Nobody expected the bison to move like this. Field teams monitoring the release site had planned for a slow, cautious integration. Instead, within months, vegetation density readings showed measurable change. Thickets that had gone untouched for 2 centuries were suddenly broken open. Here's how it happened. These animals don't graze delicately around obstacles. They push straight through dense undergrowth, using sheer mass to snap branches and flatten growth that had choked out sunlight for generations. They rub against trees hard enough to strip bark. They wallow, tearing up patches of ground down to bare soil. Forestry reports comparing before and after conditions found something forestry crews with chainsaws take years to achieve. A natural thinning process, done for free, simply by animals walking to find food and water. No machinery, no planning documents, just weight, movement, and instinct. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and join us as we uncover how animals continue to reshape the world around us. This mechanical disruption was only the first stage of a far deeper ecological restructuring. Clearing the undergrowth was only the setup. What botanical surveys picked up next was the real surprise. Bison don't just open space, they fill it back in. Seeds travel in their dung, in their matted fur, dropped mile after mile as the herd moves across the mountains. Field teams eventually traced over 200 plant species spreading this way, arriving in patches of forest that hadn't seen new growth in generations. Then there were the wallows, those shallow pits bison dig by rolling in bare soil. They fill with rainwater and become miniature wetlands, drawing in insects almost overnight. But the detail that surprised researchers most involved birds. Migrating species were observed collecting shed winter fur straight off the bison's flanks, hauling it back to line their nests against the cold mountain spring. A creature the size of a small car, unknowingly outfitting a nursery for something that weighs a few ounces. None of this was planned. None of it was managed. It emerged because one animal came back. As these ecological layers locked back into place, the numbers began to scale at an unexpected velocity. 17 animals became something else entirely. Current census data puts the Tarku herd at 194 individuals, and across the broader southern Carpathian arc, that number climbs past 350, all free roaming, all descended from that first cautious release a decade ago. This wasn't accidental growth. The Life with Bison project kept layering in new translocations, widening the genetic base and expanding territory year after year, building something closer to a network than a single herd. And the change wasn't just ecological, it was economic. This stretch of the southern Carpathians was, for decades, one of the poorer, more overlooked corners of Europe. Now it draws visitors specifically to see the bison, tracking, photography, guided treks through terrain the animals themselves reopened. Local communities that once watched young people leave for work elsewhere are now building livelihoods around the herd's presence. An apex herbivore, reintroduced to fix a forest, ended up rebuilding a regional economy almost as a side effect. 10 years after the first footprints hit the soil, the data points to a conclusion that challenges the very foundation of modern conservation. Zoom out far enough, and the numbers stop being about one mountain range. Continent-wide, the population that started at 54 has climbed past 8,000. Not managed into that shape by human hands, but grown, migrated, and rebuilt on the bison's own terms. That's the part worth sitting with. Nobody replanted those forests. Nobody engineered the wetlands or scheduled the seed dispersal. Researchers assumed the dormant seed bank beneath those thickets was long gone, exhausted after 2 centuries without disturbance. It wasn't gone. It was buried, waiting for something heavy enough to walk through and let the light back in. 54 animals in captivity. A forest that had gone quiet for generations. Undergrowth breaking open under nothing but hooves and weight. 200 plant species finding their way back into bare soil. birds lining their nests with fur shed by an animal that never noticed it was helping. A struggling mountain economy turning toward tourism built entirely around watching this happen. None of that was the plan. It was the consequence of restoring one missing piece and then stepping back. Which raises a question worth carrying with you. How many other landscapes, written off as too degraded, too far gone, too changed to recover, are actually just waiting for the right species to come home? That question doesn't stay confined to Europe. Thousands of miles away, on a different continent, another population once reduced to almost nothing was quietly rebuilding itself in ways that stunned the researchers watching it happen. And this time, the transformation moved even faster than anyone predicted. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and join us as we uncover how animals continue to reshape the world around us. The forest along the southern Carpathians was never truly empty. It was simply waiting for its architect to come home.